My husband thinks I am merely a decorative ornament in his high-rise penthouse, blissfully unaware that his empire was built entirely on my inheritance. When his mistress publicly claimed she was his real love, she made a fatal error. Julian has clearly forgotten Clause 14 of our marriage contract, so I decided it was time to show them both exactly what it means to walk away with $0 to your name. My name is Alara Vance, and in the hushed, velvet-lined circles of Chicago high society, I am often described as the quiet strength behind the throne. At 36 years old, I have spent my career as an art appraiser, distinguishing authentic masterpieces from clever forgeries, a skill that has become painfully relevant in my own home. To the public, I am the enviable wife of Julian Thorne, the charismatic CEO of Thorne Luxury. Our life is a series of carefully curated images projected onto the glossy pages of magazines. We attend charity galas where the champagne flows like water, and we retreat to a penthouse that floats above the city clouds, a sanctuary of marble and glass that feels less like a home and more like a display case. Julian was recently featured on the cover of Forbes as the self-made titan of the hospitality industry. I traced the sharp line of his jaw on the magazine cover, remembering a time when that jaw was clenched in fear rather than arrogance. 10 years ago, Julian was nothing more than a brilliant but penniless architect with a vision he could not afford. It was the Vance family trust, my inheritance, that wrote the check for $2 million to break ground on his first hotel. I built his pedestal, yet now I stand in its shadow, watching him bask in a light he believes he generated himself. Lately, the air in our penthouse has grown thin. Julian began disappearing on weekends, citing a need to expand the brand into the entertainment sector. He claimed he needed to scout locations in Miami for a new beach club. I nodded and packed his silk ties, suppressing the intuition that prickled at the back of my neck. It was during one of these packing sessions that I glanced at his synchronized digital calendar and noticed a recurring entry labeled simply as Tuesday. It struck me as odd because the entry appeared on Fridays and Saturdays. Tuesday was not a day of the week anymore. It was a person. The emotional distance manifested in criticism before it turned into absence. One evening, as I adjusted the pearls around my neck before a dinner party, Julian stood in the doorway, swirling a glass of aged scotch. He looked me up and down with a critical eye that used to hold adoration. "Ilara, you look dated," he said, his voice smooth but cutting. "That dress makes you look like a librarian. You really should try to rejuvenate your style. Look at the girls in the office. They know how to present themselves." He was talking about the new demographic he was obsessed with capturing. This obsession had a face, and her name was Sienna. She was 24 years old, a social media influencer turned interior designer whom Julian had hired to ostensibly reposition the brand identity of our boutique hotels. She was loud, vibrant, and possessed the kind of aggressive youth that made my classic elegance feel obsolete in his eyes. The final fracture in the facade appeared this morning. It is the 10th of October, our 10th wedding anniversary. I waited all morning for a card, a flower, or even a whispered acknowledgement over coffee. There was nothing. Julian rushed out the door, claiming a crisis with the supply chain. However, my skills in appraisal are not limited to canvas and oil paint. I noticed a receipt he had carelessly left on his valet stand. It was for a limited edition Hermes handbag, a purchase totaling $25,000. I felt a flutter of hope, thinking perhaps he was planning a surprise for later. That hope died when I saw the delivery note attached to the receipt. It was not addressed to Alara Vance. It was listed as a partner bonus for Sienna. He had forgotten the decade of loyalty I gave him, yet he remembered to reward a girl he had known for 3 months with a bag that cost more than his first car. I placed the receipt back exactly where I found it, my hand steady, my heart turning to ice. He thinks I am a relic, but he is about to learn that some antiques are armed with sharp edges. The shift in our marriage did not announce itself with an explosion. It was a series of micro-tremors that only a specialist would detect. It started with the technology. Julian changed the passcode on his phone, a sequence I had known for 8 years, replacing it with something new. Then came the olfactory evidence. He replaced his signature citrus blend with a heavy, musk-based sandalwood cologne. It was a jarring change, until I remembered seeing a comment from Sienna on one of his Instagram posts weeks ago where she wrote, "Sandalwood suits a man with power." Now, my husband smelled like her validation. I did not scream. I did not throw vases. Instead, I treated the evidence like a questionable painting brought to me for authentication. I examined his clothing with forensic precision. While sorting the dry cleaning, I found a faint, pinkish smudge on the inside of his white dress shirt collar. It had been scrubbed clumsily with water and soap, but the pigment remained deep in the fibers. It was a matte shade, likely a long-wear formula, completely unlike the satin finishes I favored. Later, I found a printed itinerary for 2 first-class tickets tucked inside the lining of his briefcase, dates that did not match his official schedule. "I have to fly to Aspen," Julian told me over breakfast, avoiding eye contact as he aggressively buttered his toast. "We are looking at a potential mountain resort. It will be a grueling week of site surveys." I nodded, sipping my tea. "Sounds exhausting. Make sure you pack warm clothes." 5 minutes later, I checked Sienna's public profile. She had just posted a story captioned "Winter Getaway" with a snowflake emoji. The timing was mathematically precise. I needed confirmation, not coincidence. I logged into the building's security system. As the wife of the penthouse owner, I had administrative access to the garage feeds. I watched the recording from that morning. Julian's black sedan did not turn left toward the highway that led to the airport. Instead, it turned right, heading straight for the Gold Coast district, specifically toward the Pinnacle, a high-rise residence where Sienna rented a studio. That evening, Julian video called me. On the screen, he stood against a stark white wall, the kind of neutral background designed to give away nothing. "The flight was terrible," he complained, adjusting his glasses. "The weather here in Aspen is brutal. I might lose signal soon. I miss you," I lied, leaning in closer to the screen. "Let me see your face clearly." He smirked, leaning in. "Needy tonight. Are we?" I was not looking at his eyes. I was looking at the lenses of his glasses. The reflection was tiny, but to a trained eye, it was as clear as a photograph. Behind him, reflected in the glass, was a distinctive, modern gas fireplace with a jagged stone surround. It was not a hotel room in Aspen. It was the signature architectural feature of the corner units at the Pinnacle. I ended the call and opened my laptop. It was time to look at the numbers. I pulled up the expense reports for the last quarter. I found them quickly, a series of payments labeled "Design Consultation" paid out to Sienna's company. The amounts were staggering. One invoice was for $50,000, another for $75,000. In total, he had funneled over $300,000 of company money that technically belonged to our shareholders into Sienna's personal account in less than 3 months. When Julian returned 3 days later, he was vibrating with arrogance. He tossed his coat onto the sofa, a habit he knew I detested. "You know, Alara," he said, pouring himself a drink. "Sienna has these incredible ideas for the lobby renovations. She understands the macro vision. Sometimes I feel like you are stuck in the details of the past." "Is that so?" I asked, keeping my voice even. "Yes. You need to think bigger. You are too safe." He laughed, a sound devoid of warmth. "But don't worry. I will handle the heavy lifting." I could have thrown the printed invoices at him right then. I could have screamed about the fireplace reflection or the sandalwood scent, but an amateur reveals their hand the moment they get a good card. A master plays the game until the opponent has bet everything they own. I decided I would not be the nagging wife. I would be the silent auditor. I watched him drink his scotch, oblivious to the fact that he was standing in a house of cards, and I was holding the match. I hired a private investigator named Reynolds, but I gave him a very limited scope. I needed him to dig into the background of Sienna, to find every skeleton in her closet and every unpaid parking ticket in her history. However, I refused to let him trail Julian. That was a burden I had to carry myself. I needed to see the betrayal with my own eyes to cauterize the wound, to burn away the lingering love so that only cold resolve remained. To get closer to the woman dismantling my life, I created a digital mask. I registered a new Instagram account under the name Victoria Sterling, crafting a persona of a wealthy heiress looking to renovate her vacation homes. It took 3 days of liking her posts and 2 carefully worded comments before she took the bait. She agreed to meet for a consultation at the Velvet Grind, an exclusive coffee shop in the West Loop. When I walked in, wearing oversized sunglasses and a wig cut into a sharp bob, Sienna was already there. She was radiant. I had to give her that, bubbling with the kind of energy that only comes from being 24 and believing the world revolves around you. Victoria. I am so glad you could make it, Sienna chirped, not bothering to stand up. I am squeezed for time, though my schedule is just crazy lately. I appreciate you fitting me in, I said, forcing a smile. I have heard wonderful things about your rising influence. Sienna preened, stirring her latte. The conversation started with design trends, but I steered it toward her personal life with the precision of a surgeon. It was pathetically easy. She was desperate to brag. It is not just the design work keeping me busy, Sienna confided, leaning in conspiratorially. I have a man. He is very powerful. A CEO. Sounds intense, I replied, sipping my black coffee. Is it serious? Oh, absolutely, she gushed. He is trapped in this dead marriage right now. His wife is this old money type, very stiff, very boring. He calls her a necessity, but he calls me his escape. He actually promised me this incredible ring for Christmas. It is a 4-carat emerald cut. My stomach dropped. I had seen that exact ring in Julian's browser history 2 nights ago. He had bookmarked the page. He sounds very generous, I managed to say without choking. He is, Sienna smirked. He says I am his muse. 2 days later, the theoretical betrayal became a physical reality. Julian stood in our foyer, adjusting his tie in the mirror. I have an emergency board meeting tonight. Alara, he said, not meeting my eyes. It is going to be a late one. Don't wait up. I understand, I said softly. Good luck. I waited exactly 10 minutes after he left before I followed him. He did not go to the office. He drove to the grand opening of a new indie film festival downtown. I parked my car across the street, shrouded in the darkness of the tinted windows, and raised my camera. The scene before me was like a knife twisting in my chest. Julian walked the red carpet, not as a businessman, but as a man in love. Sienna was on his arm, wearing a dress that left little to the imagination. They were not hiding. They were flaunting it to the B-list paparazzi gathered there. I zoomed in with my lens. Julian leaned down to whisper something in Sienna's ear, and she threw her head back in laughter. Then, he looked at her. He looked at her with the kind of raw, unmasked adoration he had not directed at me in 5 years. It was a look of total infatuation. Got you, I whispered, my voice trembling as the shutter clicked rapidly. But as I watched them pose, a realization hit me harder than the infidelity. The banner behind them read, "The Thorn Emerging Artists Launch." This was my concept. This was the project I had pitched to Julian 6 months ago, a program to support young artists, which he had dismissed as a waste of resources. Now, here he was, launching it with Sienna as the face of the campaign. He was not just stealing my husband, he was stealing my mind, my work, and my legacy to build a pedestal for his mistress. I lowered the camera, my hands shaking, not from sorrow, but from a cold, terrifying rage. The glow of the computer monitor was the only light in my study, casting long, sharp shadows across the room. Julian believed he was a genius for changing his phone passcode, but he had committed the cardinal sin of the arrogant underestimating his opponent. He had forgotten that I was the one who established the original server architecture for Thorn Luxury 10 years ago. I still retained the master administrative access key, A digital skeleton key that unlocked every door he thought he had bolted shut. I bypassed his firewalls in under 3 minutes. What I found was a forensic accountant's nightmare and a wife's vindication. I watched the numbers scroll down the screen, cold and irrefutable. Julian was not just spending pocket money, he was hemorrhaging our future. I traced a wire transfer initiated 48 hours ago. He had liquidated $2 million from our joint long-term investment portfolio, money set aside for a future family we never had. The destination was not a business account, but a title company in Lake Geneva. I pulled up the deed. He was buying a lakefront villa, but the name on the title was not ours. It belonged to Sienna Miller. My eyes narrowed as I dug deeper. I accessed the digital archives of the board meetings. There, attached to a resolution appointing Sienna as the new creative director with a salary of $300,000 a year, was my signature. I leaned in, examining the pixels. It was a decent forgery, likely traced from a Christmas card, but the pressure points were all wrong. He had crossed the line from moral bankruptcy into criminal fraud. I closed the laptop and walked to the wall safe concealed behind the Modigliani portrait. My hands were steady as I spun the dial right to 30, left to 10, right to 4. Inside lay a velvet envelope containing a document Julian had conveniently repressed from his memory. 3 years ago, he had made a reckless gamble with company funds that nearly invited a federal investigation. I had used my family connections to bail him out, but I had demanded insurance. I pulled out the post-nuptial agreement. I flipped past the standard assets division to page 22. Clause 14. It was a paragraph of legal text that I had drafted myself, beautiful in its brutality. It stated that in the event of proven infidelity, defined as sexual relations or romantic financial entanglement with a third party, the offending spouse would forfeit their entire equity stake in Thorn Luxury to the injured party for the nominal purchase price of $1. I picked up my secure line and dialed Arthur, the Vance family attorney for 40 years. "It is time. Arthur," I said the moment he answered. "Prepare the filings for Clause 14, but do not file them with the court yet. I want the transfer executed the moment I give the signal." "Understood, Ilara," Arthur replied, his voice gravelly with sleep but sharp with intent. "Do you have the proof I have the bank transfers, the deed to the lake house, and the forged board documents?" I confirmed. "I have everything." Later that night, Julian breezed into the library. He smelled of expensive brandy and that cloying sandalwood scent that now made my stomach turn. He was holding a manila folder, his face flushed with the intoxication of his own perceived success. "Ilara, darling," he said, dropping the folder onto the mahogany desk with a thud. "I need you to sign this. It is just a boring formality for the new project. Sienna's vision. We need to reallocate some assets from your family's charity fund to cover the initial marketing costs. It is just a temporary loan. Really." I looked at the document. He was asking me to sign away control of $5 million intended for children's hospitals. He wanted to steal from orphans to fund his mistress's vanity project. "Oh, Julian," I said, widening my eyes and feigning a look of overwhelmed confusion. "This seems so complicated. You know I get such a headache looking at all these dense legal terms." "Are you sure this is safe?" He sighed, a sound of patronizing impatience that vibrated in the quiet room. I know. That is why you have me to handle the heavy lifting. You do not need to understand the mechanics of it. Just sign it, and I will take care of the rest." I picked up a pen, hovering it over the paper, then set it down. "I will look it over tonight," I promised, giving him a soft, vacuous smile. "I want to make sure I do not mess up your vision. I would hate to make a mistake." He smirked, walking over to kiss my forehead as if I were a slow child who had finally tied her shoes correctly. "Take your time. Just do not take too long. The future waits for no one." "Ilara." He walked away, whistling a tune, believing he had won the game. He had no idea that he had just handed me the shovel. and I was already standing over his grave. I arranged our second meeting at Sienna's territory, the penthouse suite at the Pinnacle. It was a calculated move. I wanted to see exactly what my husband's money was buying, and the reality was as nauseating as I had anticipated. The rent for a unit like this was $12,000 a month, a sum that Julian had categorized in our ledger as warehouse storage fees. Sienna greeted me at the door, breathless and eager to impress the wealthy client, Victoria Sterling. She was wearing a silk kimono that I recognized from the invoices. It cost $600. "Come in, Victoria. I am so sorry about the mess." Sienna laughed, waving a hand at a pristine, professionally staged living room. "My boyfriend stayed over last night, and he is just such a whirlwind." I walked into the living room, my heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floors. My eyes immediately landed on the charcoal gray cashmere overcoat draped carelessly over the arm of the white leather sofa. Julian had told me 3 weeks ago that the dry cleaner had ruined that coat and he had thrown it away. It was one of his favorites. Seeing it here, treating this apartment as his second home, felt like a physical blow, but I forced my face into a mask of polite interest. "You have a lovely view," I commented, walking to the window. "And your partner. He seems quite comfortable here." "Oh, he practically lives here," Sienna said, flopping onto the sofa next to the coat, stroking the fabric possessively. "He says this place feels more like home than his actual house. Apparently, his wife keeps their place looking like a museum. Can you imagine living in a place where you are afraid to touch anything?" I tightened my grip on my handbag. "That does sound stifling." "Does she know about you?" Sienna let out a sharp, cruel laugh. Her pleas. She is clueless. She is one of those women who thinks that just because she has a ring, she has the man. She is so boring. Julian tells me she wears these awful high-necked dresses and talks about art history all day. She is archaic. "It sounds like a difficult situation for him," I prodded, keeping my voice smooth. "Why does he stay obligations?" Sienna sighed, rolling her eyes. "But not for long. He promised me that as soon as the new resort project is finished and the stock prices jump, he is filing for divorce. He says he cannot stand another year of her suffocating silence." She leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with triumph. "He told me last night that what he has with her is just a business merger that went on too long. But with me, he called me his real love. He said I am the only one who makes him feel alive." My hand brushed against the strap of my Hermes bag, checking the position of the Mont Blanc pen clipped to the side. It was not a pen, it was a high-fidelity recording device, and the red light was blinking silently, capturing every syllable of her confession. "Real love," I repeated, testing the weight of the words. "That is a very powerful declaration. And a business merger?" "That is a very specific way to describe a marriage. It is the truth." Sienna shrugged. "She provided the capital. Sure, but he provided the genius. Now that he is a millionaire on his own, he does not need her money or her gloom anymore. He is going to leave her with nothing but her dusty paintings." I felt a cold, jagged shard of anger settle in my gut, but on the surface, I smiled. It was the smile of a predator watching prey walk into a trap. "Well, Sienna," I said, checking my watch, "you have certainly given me a lot to think about regarding the design of my future projects. You have a very distinct vision." "I do," she beamed, oblivious to the double meaning. "I think we are going to work great together, Victoria." "I think so too," I said, walking toward the door. "In fact, I am so impressed by your honesty that I want to prepare a special contract for us. I will see you next week at the Thorn Anniversary Gala. I believe I have a big surprise for you there." "You are coming to the gala?" she asked. Surprised. "I would not miss it for the world," I replied, opening the door. "It is going to be a night of revelations." I left her standing there, surrounded by the luxury my inheritance had paid for, wearing the confidence that my husband had stolen from me. She thought she was the queen of the castle, unaware that I was the one holding the deed, the match, and the gasoline. The house was quiet, possessing the eerie stillness that often precedes a hurricane. Julian stood in the kitchen, casually flipping through the gold-embossed invitations for the 10th anniversary gala of Thorn Luxury. This was the night he intended to unveil his masterpiece to the world. He was not planning to showcase a new building. He was planning to introduce Sienna as the new creative director, a title that carried a salary higher than the combined wages of our entire housekeeping staff. He looked up at me, his face arranging itself into a mask of faux concern that he had perfected over the last few months. "Ilara, I have been thinking," he started, his voice dripping with insincere syrup. "Tomorrow is going to be an incredibly long night. Loud music, flashing lights, endless press questions. You know how you get migraines in those environments. Maybe it would be best if you stayed home, or perhaps just made a brief appearance and left by 8 o'clock." I knew exactly what he was doing. He wanted the frame clear. He wanted to stand on that stage with Sienna, basking in the flashbulbs, without his dowdy, aging wife hovering in the background like a specter of his past obligations. I slumped my shoulders slightly, putting a hand to my temple to feign exhaustion. "You know, you might be right, Julian. I have been feeling so fragile lately. I do not want to ruin your big night with my fainting spells." "Exactly," he said, barely concealing his relief as he checked his watch. "Rest is what you need. I will handle the press. I will tell them you are under the weather. It is for the best." He left the room whistling, convinced he had neutralized the only obstacle in his path. He was a fool. As soon as his car left the driveway, I was on the phone with Marcus, the head of the technical team for the venue. Marcus had started as an intern for my father 20 years ago. He knew exactly whose money kept the lights on at Thorn Luxury, and his loyalty had never wavered. I met Marcus in the server room of the hotel that afternoon. The air conditioning hummed loudly, masking our conspiracy. "Mrs. Thorn," Marcus said, standing straight. "We received the presentation file from Ms. Sienna this morning. It is titled The Future of Luxury." "Delete it," I commanded calmly. "I have a new file for you. It is titled The Cost of Betrayal." "I want you to lock the system so that once this file starts playing, it cannot be stopped from the podium." "Can you do that?" Marcus looked at the flash drive I handed him, then back at me. He did not ask questions. "Consider it done." "Ma'am, what about the audio feed route the main microphone priority directly to my personal transmitter?" I instructed. "When I step on stage, I want total silence from everyone else. I want them to be unable to cut me off." With the stage set, I returned home to secure the back end. I spent the next 3 hours transferring every liquid asset from our joint account savings, investment dividends, even the emergency reserve into the Vance Heritage Trust, an irrevocable entity I had established days ago. By the time I logged off, the joint account balance read $0.00. Julian would wake up the morning after the gala to find he could not even buy a cup of coffee. That night, the eve of the gala, Julian did not come home. He sent a text message at 11 o'clock late rehearsal with the production team. "Don't wait up. Love. Jay." I looked at the GPS tracker on my phone. The blue dot was stationary, parked securely in the garage of the Pinnacle. He was not rehearsing a script. He was rehearsing his new life with Sienna. I walked into my dressing room and pushed aside the beige and pastel gowns Julian preferred I wear. The ones that made me fade into the wallpaper. Hidden in the back, inside a garment bag I had brought in secretly, was my armor. I unzipped the bag to reveal a floor-length gown in deep, blood-red wine velvet. It was structured, daring, and cut to show a dangerous amount of skin, a dress for a woman who commands a room, not one who hides in the corners. I held the dress up against my body in the mirror. My reflection stared back, eyes hard and cold. Julian wanted a trophy wife tomorrow. He would get a warrior queen. And when I was done with him, he would wish he had never learned the definition of the word revenge. The grand ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton was a cavern of crystal chandeliers and hollow laughter, filled to the brim with the Chicago elite, hungry gossip columnists, and investors desperate to be close to power. It was the social event of the season, a spectacle of excess where a single bottle of champagne cost more than most people earned in a month. At the center of this swirling galaxy of wealth stood Julian, preening in his tuxedo, looking every bit the master of the universe he pretended to be. Clinging to his arm was Sienna. She had the sheer audacity to wear white. It was not a subtle cream or ivory. It was a blinding, bridal white, a floor-length gown with lace detailing that screamed of a wedding that had not happened yet. It was a visual declaration of war. She beamed at the cameras, soaking up the attention like a parched plant in rain. I watched from the shadows of the entrance for a moment, observing the farce. A reporter from the Tribune thrust a microphone toward Sienna. "Ms. Miller, you seem to be playing a very prominent role in the company tonight," the reporter noted. Sienna laughed, a practiced tinkling sound, and squeezed Julian's hand openly. "Well, let's just say that the company needs fresh energy. I am just happy to step into the role I was meant for. Julian and I share a unique vision for the future." It was exactly 30 minutes past the scheduled start time. I had waited until every guest had arrived and the anticipation was at its peak. I stepped out of the shadows and into the foyer light. The reaction was instantaneous. A hush started at the back of the room and rolled forward like a tidal wave as heads turned. I was not wearing the beige chiffon or the modest pastels Julian always insisted upon. I was wearing the deep wine-red velvet gown, structured and sharp, with a neckline that plunged daringly and a silhouette that commanded attention. I walked with the cadence of a queen returning to reclaim her throne. The crowd parted for me, a mixture of awe and confusion on their faces. I saw the color drain from Julian's face across the room. He looked as if he had seen a ghost. He excused himself abruptly from a group of Japanese investors and rushed toward me, his smile fixed and brittle, but his eyes were wide with panic. He grabbed my elbow, his fingers digging into my flesh with bruising force. "What are you doing here?" he hissed through his teeth, keeping his voice low so the cameras would not catch the venom. "You said you were sick. You look distinct. This is too much. Go home. Alara, you are making a scene." I looked down at his hand on my arm, then up at his eyes. I did not flinch. With a sharp, violent motion, I ripped my arm away from his grasp, making him stumble back a step. "Do not touch me," I said, my voice cold enough to freeze the humidity in the room. "And do not tell me when to leave a party that I paid for." Sienna slithered up beside him, sensing his loss of control. She scanned me from head to toe, her lip curling in disdain. She leaned in close, her perfume cloying and sweet, masking the rot of her character. "You really should listen to him. Alara," she whispered, her voice a poisonous purr meant only for me. "You look tired, desperate. Go home and rest. Tonight is for the future, not for washed-up has-beens." I looked at her, locking eyes with the arrogance of youth, and I smiled. It was a terrifying, serene expression. "You are right. Sienna," I replied, my voice projecting just enough for the surrounding circle of guests to hear clearly. "Tonight is not for lies. Tonight is for naked truths." Before they could process my words, the lights in the ballroom dimmed. The main spotlight hit the stage. The master of ceremonies, a man named Richard who had been a loyal friend to my father for 20 years and despised Julian, stepped up to the microphone. He ignored the cue cards Julian's PR team had prepared. "Ladies and gentlemen," Richard boomed, his voice echoing through the silent hall. "Please welcome to the stage the face of Thorne Luxury, Mr. Julian Thorne, and, in a special surprise, please give a warm welcome to the true architect of this empire, the woman whose capital and vision made this all possible, his co-founder, Mrs. Alara Vance." The applause was polite but confused. Julian froze. This was not in the script. He looked at me, sheer terror flaring in his eyes, but the spotlight was already swinging toward us, trapping him in its glare. He had no choice. He could not run. He forced a smile that looked like a rictus of pain and offered me his arm. I ignored it completely and walked ahead of him, ascending the stairs to the stage where I would finally bring the guillotine down. Julian realized too late that he had walked into an execution, not a celebration. He lunged for the podium microphone, his hand trembling as he tried to cut me off, but his knuckles turned white as he realized the device was dead. I had instructed the sound engineer to mute every input except for the lavalier microphone clipped discreetly to my velvet dress. Julian tapped the microphone frantically, his mouth moving in a silent scream of panic, looking like a fish gasping for air on a dry dock. "Do not bother. Julian," I said, my voice booming through the surround sound system, crystal clear and terrifyingly calm. "The audience is not here to hear your excuses. They are here to see the receipts." I turned to the crowd, scanning the sea of shocked faces. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us tonight. We are not just celebrating 10 years of Thorn luxury. We are celebrating the end of a decade of deception." I pressed the clicker concealed in my palm. The massive LED screen behind us, which was supposed to display Sienna's avant-garde architectural renderings, flickered and changed. It did not show a hotel. It showed a series of high-resolution bank statements. The font was massive, allowing everyone in the back row to read the line items. "As you can see," I narrated, pointing to the screen where a transaction for $75,000 was highlighted in red. "This is the company capital used to purchase a lakefront villa. And this?" I clicked again, revealing a receipt for the limited edition Hermes bag, "is a $25,000 bonus for our new creative director, purchased with funds allocated for employee health care." A collective gasp ripped through the room. It sounded like the air being sucked out of an airlock. I saw Sienna near the front stage, her face draining of color until she looked like a wax figure. She hiked up her white dress and tried to scramble up the stairs to the stage, her eyes wild with desperation. "Turn it off!" she shrieked. "You cannot do this." Two burly security guards, men who used to work for my father, stepped in front of her, crossing their arms like iron gates. She bounced off them, helpless and hysterical. I turned back to Julian, who was gripping the podium as if it were the only thing keeping him upright. "My husband told this young woman that she was his real love," I announced, my voice dropping an octave, heavy with disdain. "He told her that I was just a business merger. So, I think it is only fair that I show her, and all of you, our real marriage contract." I clicked the remote again. The bank statements vanished, replaced by a black screen. Then, the audio began to play. It was the recording from Sienna's apartment, amplified to concert-level volume. "She is archaic." Sienna's voice sneered through the speakers, distorted but unmistakable. "Julian tells me she wears these awful high-necked dresses. He calls me his real love." Then came Julian's voice, the sound of his betrayal echoing off the gold-leafed ceiling. "It is just a business merger that went on too long. I will leave her with nothing." The room was so quiet that I could hear the ice melting in the champagne buckets. Julian squeezed his eyes shut, his public mask shattering into dust. "And now for the encore," I said, pressing the button one last time. The screen exploded into white, displaying a single scanned document, page 22 of our post-nuptial agreement. I had the technical team zoom in on Clause 14 until the words were 10 feet tall. Clause 14. I read aloud, savoring every syllable. "In the event of proven infidelity, all equity and assets held by Julian Thorn in Thorn Luxury shall be transferred to Ilara Vance for the sum of $1. I turned to Julian, who was staring at the screen, his mouth slightly open, reading the legal definition of his own demise. $1. "Julian," I whispered, though the microphone carried it to every corner of the room. "That is exactly how much you are worth to this company as of this moment. You wanted to leave me with nothing. Congratulations. You just played yourself into bankruptcy. He stood there, frozen in the spotlight, stripped of his title, his fortune, and his dignity in under 5 minutes. He looked out at the investors he had tried so hard to impress, and saw only their disgust. The king of hospitality was now just a beggar in a tuxedo. Arthur, my family's attorney, emerged from the wings like a grim reaper in a charcoal suit. He did not rush. He walked with the measured pace of a man who knew he held the winning hand. He approached Julian, who was still clutching the dead podium as if it were a life raft, and slapped a thick stack of legal documents onto the wood surface. The sound cracked through the silent room like a gavel strike. "Mr. Thorne," Arthur said, his voice projecting clearly without need for amplification. "This is a court order enforcing Clause 14, effective immediately. You are stripped of your executive powers and your seat on the board. You are trespassing on company property." I turned my attention to Sienna. She was standing at the foot of the stairs, trembling in the grip of the security guards. She looked small now, her bridal white dress seeming ridiculous rather than triumphant. "As for you, Ms. Miller," I said, speaking into my microphone with deadly precision. "The internal audit has categorized the $300,000 in consulting fees and the $25,000 handbag as unauthorized expenditures of company funds. In legal terms, that is called embezzlement. You have 24 hours to return every single cent to the corporate accounts, or my next call will be to the district attorney." Sienna gasped, her face twisting in horror as she realized her free ride had just become a prison sentence. But the true spectacle was Julian, the man who had strutted across magazine covers, the man who had belittled my intelligence for years, crumbled before my eyes. He did not stand and fight. He collapsed. He fell to his knees right there on the stage, weeping openly. "Ilara, please," he sobbed, reaching out to grab the hem of my velvet gown. I took a sharp step back, letting his hand grasp at empty air. I made a mistake. Please, you have to listen to me. It was her. She seduced me. She clouded my judgment. I never loved her. She meant nothing to me." "Ilara, nothing." A collective gasp went through the crowd, but the loudest sound came from the floor. Sienna's eyes went wide, filling with a mixture of shock and feral rage. The man who had called her his real love was now throwing her to the wolves to save his own skin. "You liar!" Sienna screamed, her voice shrill and breaking. She broke free from the guard's loosened grip and scrambled up the stairs. Before anyone could stop her, she lunged at Julian. She slapped him across the face, a sharp, violent crack that echoed through my microphone. "You coward! You told me she was nothing! You used me." They were a tangle of limbs and accusations, a pathetic display of greed turning upon itself. I watched them with the detached curiosity of a scientist observing rats in a maze. "Enough!" I commanded. The security team surged forward, pulling Sienna off of Julian and hauling Julian to his feet. He looked wretched, his tuxedo rumpled, his cheek red from the slap, tears streaming down his face. "You deserve each other," I said, my voice cutting through their sobbing. "But you do not deserve my money." I signaled to the head of security, a man named Frank who had protected my family for 15 years. "Frank, take his keys," I ordered. "The Aston Martin is a company vehicle. Take his platinum credit cards and his VIP access pass. He leaves with nothing but the clothes on his back." Frank moved efficiently, patting down Julian and confiscating the keys and wallet while Julian stood there, limp and defeated. The guards began to drag them both toward the exit. Sienna was wailing, and Julian hung his head, unable to look at the hundreds of people witnessing his ruin. As the double doors swung shut behind them, sealing their fate, I turned back to the audience. The room was paralyzed, unsure of how to react to the brutality they had just witnessed. I smoothed the fabric of my dress and smiled, a genuine, warm smile. The $5 million that was previously allocated for the project known as Sienna's Vision will not be wasted, I announced softly. Tonight, I am pledging that entire sum to the Chicago Women's Shelter to establish a new legal aid fund for victims of financial abuse. We will turn this ugly chapter into a new beginning for those who truly need it. For a second, there was silence. Then, one person started clapping, then another. Within moments, the entire ballroom erupted into a thunderous standing ovation. I stood alone on that massive stage, bathed in the bright white spotlight. I had no husband. I had no creative director. I had just decimated my personal life in front of the entire city. Yet, as I looked out at the sea of applauding hands, I realized I had never felt less lonely. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the sweet, intoxicating air of absolute freedom. The legal fallout was swift, absolute, and deeply satisfying. Once I stopped covering Julian's tracks, his financial house of cards collapsed within 48 hours. It turned out that the facade of the millionaire lifestyle had been hiding a gambling addiction that ran into the hundreds of thousands of dollars. Without my family trust to silently extinguish his debts, Julian was forced to file for personal bankruptcy. The court seized his remaining assets, and he moved from our sky-high penthouse to a damp, one-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood he used to make fun of when we drove past it. Sienna fared no better. My legal team filed a civil suit against her for the misappropriation of corporate funds. To stay out of prison, she had to liquidate everything. I watched with grim amusement as she posted desperate sales listings online, selling the designer bags and shoes she had once flaunted as gifts from her soulmate. The internet, once her kingdom, turned on her with vicious speed. The hashtag homewrecker trended for 3 days, and every brand deal she had evaporated overnight. She was not just canceled, she was erased. I wasted no time in scrubbing the stain of the Thorn name from my legacy. I rebranded the company as Vance Global. The stock price, which had wobbled during the scandal, stabilized and then soared as investors realized that the competent partner was now the sole captain of the ship. I was no longer the silent wife in the background. I was the chairwoman, and for the first time in my life, I demanded the respect I had always deserved. 6 months later, fate offered me a final poetic glimpse of the past. I stopped at a small all-night diner on the outskirts of the city after a late inspection of a new property. As I walked toward a booth, I saw him. Julian was wearing a cheap uniform that fit poorly, wiping down a greasy table. He was the night shift manager. He looked up, and our eyes met. He looked older, defeated, the arrogance completely washed away by the harsh reality of minimum wage. "Ilara," he whispered, his voice cracking, his hand reaching out instinctively as if he thought he could still touch me. I did not stop. I did not glare. I simply looked through him as if he were part of the furniture, a ghost that no longer haunted me. I kept walking, sat down, and ordered my coffee black. The indifference I felt was the truest sign of my healing. I sold the penthouse shortly after the divorce. The glass walls held too many cold memories. Instead, I purchased a dilapidated Victorian villa in the suburbs, a place with good bones that needed love and patience much like myself. I returned to my true passion of art restoration. It was there, amidst the smell of turpentine and varnish, that I met Liam. He was a landscape architect, a man who worked with his hands and understood that beauty takes time to grow. "You have paint on your cheek," Liam told me yesterday, reaching out to gently wipe it away with his thumb. "It suits you." He does not care about Vance Global. He loves the woman who spends hours saving forgotten masterpieces. He loves me for my mind, not the safety of my bank account. As I stand in my studio today, the afternoon light filtering through the dust motes, I realize the most important lesson of all. True love does not need to be broadcast on a stage or validated by strangers on the internet. And sometimes, a watertight marriage contract is far more romantic than any whispered promise because it guarantees your freedom. I pick up my brush and sign my name in the corner of the canvas I have just finished restoring. It is a painting of a phoenix rising from the ashes. I smile, a full, peaceful expression that reaches my eyes. I am Alara Vance, and I am finally the artist of my own life. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please comment down below and let's share our thoughts. If you enjoyed seeing justice served, please subscribe to the Lily Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button so this story can be heard by even more people.